At 8 p.m. on a Tuesday, the clock ran out on one of the most dangerous ultimatums an American president has issued in modern history. A whole civilization, Trump had warned, would die tonight. 1 hour before that deadline, Iran blinked. The ceasefire held. But the words that got the world to that moment, and the silence from America's closest ally, will not be forgotten. Welcome to Flashpoint, where power shifts before the headlines catch up. To understand what happened this week, you need to understand the trajectory that brought the world to this edge. The war in Iran did not begin with Trump's Tuesday post. It began weeks earlier when the United States and Israel launched strikes aimed at preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. At the onset, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney did something that surprised many observers. He supported the strikes. Canada backed the military action as a legitimate means of addressing what Carney described as a genuine global security threat. Iran's pattern of ignoring UN Security Council resolutions, the failure of diplomacy, the nuclear threat that had hung over the region for years. But within days, the tone shifted. Carney said that support came with regret. He called the conflict another example of the failure of the international order. He cited not just Iran's behavior, but the conduct of America and Israel, specifically their failure to consult with allies, including Canada, before launching the attacks. That was the first signal that Carney was drawing a line between supporting the original objective and endorsing everything that followed. It was a careful distinction, and it was about to be tested far more severely than anyone anticipated, because Trump was just getting started. Last week, Trump said the United States would bomb Iran back to the Stone Ages if the Strait of Hormuz was not reopened. It was incendiary language, the kind that makes diplomatic cables burn and markets shudder, but it was only the opening act. On Easter Sunday, Trump escalated further, threatening to destroy Iranian power plants and bridges. Every power plant, he warned, would be burning, exploding, and never to be used again. And then on Tuesday, Trump posted what may be the most alarming public statement an American president has made in a generation. A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again, if a deal isn't reached to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. A whole civilization. In a social media post, with an 8 p.m. deadline. The international reaction was immediate and unambiguous. UN Secretary-General António Guterres warned the United States directly. Attacks on civilian infrastructure are banned under international law. The message was not subtle. It was a public legal warning issued to the most powerful military on earth by the head of the institution designed to prevent exactly this kind of escalation. Pope Leo XIV went further. Trump's threat to destroy Iranian civilization was, in the Pope's words, truly unacceptable. Any attacks on civilian infrastructure, the Pope said, violate international law. When the head of the Catholic Church and the Secretary-General of the United Nations issue coordinated warnings to an American president on the same day, the world is watching something extraordinary. And Trump's response to questions about war crimes, he said he is not at all concerned. Subscribe right now, because what I'm about to show you is how Carney navigated the most delicate diplomatic moment of his tenure, and why his response is already generating fierce debate inside Canada. At a Thursday news conference in Brampton, Ontario, Carney was asked directly about Trump's remarks. His answer was precise, deliberate, and notable for what it did not say. All parties in the Iran war need to respect international law, Carney said. That means not targeting civilians or civilian infrastructure. We urge all parties in this war to follow those responsibilities. All parties. Not the United States specifically, not Trump by name. Every word was chosen. Every omission was intentional. Carney's position reflects the impossible geometry of Canada's situation. On one side, a trade war with Washington that has already cost over 100,000 Canadian jobs, with CUSMA negotiations approaching in July and Canada's entire export framework hanging in the balance. On the other side, a principle, the rules-based international order, that Carney himself invoked at Davos when he called for middle powers to act together precisely because that order was under threat. The man who gave the speech about standing up for international norms is now being asked whether he will name the country violating them, and his answer, so far, is to speak in principles without naming names. Not everyone in Canada is satisfied with that answer. NDP MP Don Davies was direct in his criticism. Our ally is threatening genocide, Davies posted on X. At Davos, our Prime Minister promised principled consistency. Where's Canada's condemnation? Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet went further, calling on Carney to summon U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra to inform him that Canada will not condone any words or actions of such violence against civilians. These are not fringe voices. These are opposition leaders with parliamentary mandates demanding that Canada's government say explicitly what it has so far only implied. Carney's refusal to name Trump directly is a strategic calculation, not a moral failure. At least that is the most charitable reading. Canada is simultaneously managing a trade crisis with Washington, building an alternative trade architecture with the EU and CPTPP nations, hitting NATO's 2% defense spending target for the first time in 12 years, and trying to position itself as a credible middle power in a world where American reliability is in question. Picking a direct public fight with Trump over his Iran rhetoric, at the exact moment CUSMA negotiations are approaching, carries real costs. Carney knows it. His critics know it too. The question is whether the cost of silence is higher than the cost of speaking. Just over an hour before Trump's 8 p.m. deadline, the crisis pulled back from the edge. Trump announced he was pulling back from his threats of widespread strikes, subject to Iran agreeing to a 2-week ceasefire and reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's Supreme National Security Council confirmed it had accepted. The deadline passed. The civilization Trump threatened did not die tonight, but the words existed, they were said, and the international legal framework that prohibits threats of collective punishment against civilian populations does not have an expiry clause just because a ceasefire was reached. Experts who spoke with the Associated Press noted the legal complexity. Infrastructure like power facilities can be attacked under the laws of armed conflict if it provides electricity to a military base in addition to civilians, but strikes must not cause disproportionate harm to the civilian population. The legal line is not a simple one, but Trump's language, every power plant burning and exploding, a whole civilization dying, went well beyond anything that fits within that legal framework, regardless of the eventual military outcome. Scenario 1. The 2-week ceasefire holds. Negotiations produce a framework for reopening the Strait of Hormuz on terms that both sides can accept. Trump's threats recede into the background as diplomatic progress takes over the headlines. Carney's measured response, calling for international law without naming Trump, is vindicated as the approach that preserved Canada's diplomatic relationships on all sides without triggering a trade crisis at the worst possible moment. The CUSMA review in July proceeds with the Canada-US relationship intact, if strained. Scenario 2. The ceasefire breaks down within days. Trump reissues his threats. The international pressure that produced the first ceasefire, from Guterres, from the Pope, from allied governments, fails to produce a second one. Military action against Iranian civilian infrastructure follows. Canada faces an impossible choice: explicitly condemn a U.S. military action and risk the CUSMA negotiations, or stay silent and lose the moral credibility that Carney built at Davos and in every speech about the rules-based international order since. The domestic political pressure from the NDP and Bloc becomes impossible to ignore. Carney speaks. The relationship with Washington deteriorates further. Scenario 3. The ceasefire holds, but the damage to the international legal order is already done. Trump's public declaration that he is not at all concerned about war crimes, combined with the international community's failure to produce meaningful consequences for those statements, establishes a precedent. Other leaders observe that threatening civilian populations with destruction carries no real cost. The rules-based order that Carney has spent months trying to defend and rebuild does not collapse in a single night. It erodes, statement by statement, threat by threat, ceasefire by ceasefire, until the rules exist only on paper, and the middle powers who tried to defend them are left holding documents that no longer bind anyone who matters. Trump threatened to destroy a civilization with an 8 p.m. deadline. Iran accepted a ceasefire just over an hour before that deadline expired. Carney called for international law without naming the country whose president said he is not concerned about war crimes. The Pope spoke. The UN Secretary-General warned. The opposition demanded more, and the clock for now has stopped. Watch whether the 2-week ceasefire holds. Watch whether Carney is forced to name Trump explicitly as the pressure from opposition parties builds. Watch what comes out of any Iran negotiations over the next 14 days, and watch whether the international community produces any consequences for the threats that were made, because if it doesn't, the rules that were invoked this week will mean a little less the next time they are needed. Subscribe to Flashpoint and hit the bell, because in this world, the next move never waits.